911, what is the address of your emergency?
I went down there and some guy was putting a blanket over her body. Yeah, this guy's not moving.
This attack was violent.
It's like having my worst nightmare come true.
We start to look immediately for any surveillance cameras.
There's probably blood on his shoes.
We're in a race with this time to find this person as quickly as possible.
Tony, he had a lot of love to give. Tony met his wife. They had a couple of kids, and he was a really good father. He loved spending time with them.
He was a fun dad, just kind of the kind that's, threw the kids up in the air all the time and ran outside with them.
There wasn't a kid that didn't love him. Just about every picture ever taken of them, it was always him holding the babies. That's the happiest he'd ever been.
But my brother had a hard time with his mental health, and his depression did start to get a lot more noticeable.
We tried to get him into counseling and tried to get him on meds, and he refused to do it. He said, "Mom, if I try to get that help, that means I'm gonna have to admit to myself I'm broken, and I just can't do that."
When he and his wife ended up splitting up, it was really, really hard on him.
Hi. I hope you can help. I'm looking for my son.
We had no idea where he went.
As a family, we were trying everything we could to try to find him.
We would try to, contact him through email or Messenger on Facebook, but he pretty much literally dropped off the face of the earth for us.
Every day, there's always that constant fear that something was going to happen to him.
What is the address of your emergency?
I'm on the fourth floor. I went down there and some guy was putting a blanket over her body, and it's still there. And her body never moved.
Okay, 1 second for me here.
They're just yelling, "Stop, stop!" Yeah, this guy's not moving.
All right, the officer should be arriving at it now, okay?
The responding officers, they found the victim down on the sidewalk.
Unresponsive, get EMS rolling.
He had severe trauma to his head and face. He was having difficulty breathing.
He was identified by an ID that was in his pocket. The victim was James Tony Wise. Tony Wise was transferred to the hospital. Arrived around 7:30 in the morning. At this time, officers had the scene taped off, trying to separate witnesses and preserving the crime scene.
When we arrived, we filmed crime scenes to capture and document the evidence.
There was an opening to a fence to a parking lot. That's where Tony was located.
This must be where the assault took place.
There was a pool of blood. I saw some other items that were kind of strewed up on the ground. There was a metal scooter, pink pepper spray. There was a tent that was kind of smashed down to the ground.
Did you know Tony Wise? Okay.
We had spoken to a witness out at the scene who told us they were familiar with Tony Weiss. That witness identified his tent and said that he had been in that area for some time.
Take this out over here.
We were able to see that there were shoe impressions on the tent that appeared to be in blood.
If we could locate that shoe, that was potentially going to be a key piece of evidence for us down the road.
it definitely stood out as something that was a pretty violent attack. We were wondering what could have been the motive to what happened.
Detectives contact Marcus Dayton, the 911 caller who witnessed the attack from his apartment.
This is Detective Greenley with the Portland Police Bureau. Thanks for taking my call. So if you can just kind of start from the beginning, you were in your residence there?
4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm on that side of the street, my window.
Marcus Dayton looked down to the street below his unit, out to 3rd Avenue.
And all of a sudden, I see this guy, like, lifting himself off the fence and then coming down with his leg, stomping on something.
He sees the suspect hitting and kicking what he thought initially was maybe a bag of trash, but this person was using the fence and stomping another person's head extremely violently.
The guy that you see, let's describe him.
Let's say about 5'10", 5'11".
How much does he weigh?
170, 180 pounds.
He gave a very good description of the clothing that was unique.
He had a black mask on, he had a black sweatshirt, jogging shirt, and it had red markings on either side.
He also described him as having white shoes.
There's probably blood on his shoe from stomping the guy's head to the fucking ground.
After the assault ended, he observed the suspect walking southbound on Northwest 3rd Avenue, where he loses sight of the suspect. This person was definitely a danger to the public, and we needed to locate and arrest this person as soon as we can.
Investigators enlist forensic evidence technician Mark Weber to find cameras that might show the attack.
I went to the ODOT building, Oregon Department of Transportation, to get video. They have a lot of exterior cameras that help cover the streets in that area. The building itself is 1 block directly east of the crime scene. There was one camera angle on the ODOT building that pointed straight across that parking lot. Right in the area where Tony's tent was, I was hoping it could show the crime scene and show the attack.
Officer Weber brings the footage to the police bureau for analysis.
Let's see what we got.
This view, which covers this entire parking lot, but it's so far away, you're gonna watch it as carefully as you can.
This looks like the area where Mr. Wise was attacked. Let's go to 4 a.m. just before the 911 call.
So looking at the frame, I'm really focusing right around Mr. Wise's tent in the area where I know the pool of blood was located.
Wait, who's that?
I see a figure walk towards the direction of where Mr. Wise's tent was. And then I also see another figure also come into frame as well. And it looks like then the two figures kind of interact.
Something's happening.
It looked like there was a physical altercation that occurred between the two persons. And at one point in time, a person is knocked to the ground. The suspect continued to kick and punch while the victim was on the ground. Unfortunately, now there's a tree that kind of blocks some of the view.
Replay it.
The 911 caller describes this subject to be wearing lighter colored pants and a darker colored top.
There's light pants. That's gotta be our suspect.
And that's Tony Wise.
The video shows the interaction between the suspect and the victim, and it actually kind of seconds what we heard from witnesses.
It looks like the altercation happens rather quickly. You could tell the fight was a violent fight just based on the person getting knocked down. It appeared that there was only 2 people involved. The biggest drawback about this camera was that it was from far away. It was hard to positively ID the people.
Investigators search for surveillance cameras that are closer to the crime scene.
We should be able to find him on other video for the projected time of our homicide.
The attack happened in front of the Blanchet house. There's 1 camera on the building pointed north. And there was 1 camera pointed south.
Investigators analyze the footage from both cameras.
All right, can you start about a half hour for the first 911 call?
The camera angle that we're observing here is facing to the south. To the left is the parking lot that's fenced off, and you only capture the top portion of that.
Zoom in.
We start watching the video at approximately 3:50 a.m. We notice where Mr. Weiss's tent is, that portion is not captured in this camera frame.
Well, we were hoping that this camera might have captured maybe our suspect coming to the scene.
Wait. Who's that? Who's that?
At approximately 3:56, 20 minutes prior to this incident being called into the police, we observed a subject on the sidewalk.
It does look like he was kind of loitering.
Freeze it there. Zoom in on him.
It's difficult to make out facial characteristics of the person, but he's wearing lighter pants and what appear to be white shoes, which is consistent with the description Marcus Dayton provided us.
Let's try the north camera. A minute or 2 beforehand, see where he came from.
There was another camera angle that faced right at the intersection of 3rd and Gleason.
Play that again. Zoom in on him. Freeze it there.
3:55 a.m. on the north camera, we observed the subject that we had seen on the south camera.
That's gotta be him.
You could tell that the jacket the person is wearing is a 2-tone jacket. That kind of gives him away.
This is a big moment because then we're seeing some corroboration on video that kind of matches what our 911 caller is describing.
We didn't get a good shot of his face. This was during COVID, so he was wearing a face mask at the time.
Okay, keep playing.
We see the suspect. He speaks with someone at the northwest corner of the intersection at Gleason and 3rd Avenue.
Then I can see our suspect walking back southbound towards the direction of our scene,
putting him directly in the path of Mr. Weiss's tent, which is just off camera.
We still don't know who our suspect is, but we have a better idea of his movement throughout the scene to start looking at different cameras in the area.
Detective Clifton. Okay, I see. Okay, thank you. Bye. That was the hospital. It looks like he's not going to make it.
We're notified that Mr. Weiss is not going to survive his injuries.
It was severe skull fractures that Tony Wise received.
That's his mother's number.
Hello?
I kind of knew right then before he went any further that it was something about my son. And it was like having my worst nightmare come true.
Where is he? Okay, thank you.
I needed to be with him to say goodbye as good as I could. When I saw him, I just kept telling him over and over, I love you, son. I love you so much. But he couldn't hear it. At least, I was able to hold his hand and tell him goodbye, and I would see him in another life.
Tony dies from his injuries the following day.
It turns into a homicide investigation at that point. We want to bring justice to the family and know that this person's being held accountable for their actions. Detective Greenlee and I are on scene getting briefings from the responding officers. We learn that another assault had occurred earlier in the morning.
So there was another assault just around the corner.
What?
Yeah.
The officer tells investigators that the assault happened around 2:55 a.m., 80 minutes before the attack on Tony Wise.
And it was a block across from where Mr. Weiss had been assaulted.
We don't know if they were connected, but it was definitely odd. It was very similar to the attack on Mr. Wise.
A witness called 911 to report the incident.
911, what is the address of the emergency? I am right in front of the Chinese Garden downtown. There's this man that was really brutally beat up, and he's passed out on the side of his car, and he's really bloody. I don't think he's conscious. What's the color inside the vehicle? It's a white Mercedes-Benz.
What stood out to us was the witness was describing the suspect also kind of kicking and stomping the victim, and the victim also had severe injuries to his face.
The victim of the assault is Tembelani Deniso.
How many people assaulted him? It was 2 guys.
What about the victim?
I learned from Officer Garth that he interviewed the victim, Mr. Deniso, at the hospital.
He couldn't remember any of it.
He was unable to provide much of a statement as to what occurred because of the head injury.
The Mercedes-Benz was currently still located at the scene. So we take a look. We saw a significant amount of blood on the vehicle.
Some of our criminalists document the scene in photographs and collect blood evidence as well.
With Tony Wise and another victim, Mr. Deniso, the similarities stood out. But we just didn't have much information on what could have been the motive connecting these 2 incidents. Tony Wise was homeless, and now we have another victim with a vehicle, a Mercedes-Benz.
You have a person just randomly assaulting and attacking people downtown. It's very unusual. We start looking for surveillance video cameras in that area that we can capture this assault and see if it matches up with the suspect that we had seen at the Blanchet house. Right at the corner there is the Trailhead Credit Union. We observed the credit union there to have an exterior surveillance camera that we believe captures that intersection and ultimately that first assault.
Investigators review the footage back at the police bureau.
Can you go to 2:30 a.m., see if we can spot the vehicle?
We're looking for a white Mercedes. There's a lot of lighting there, so you can see everything in color. The video doesn't come out grainy.
There was a good camera that picked up the intersection. I'm really looking, can I place Mr. Deniso's vehicle there?
There, that's it.
At 2:42 hours on the camera, we observed Deniso's white Mercedes driving northbound on Northwest 2nd Avenue.
You can see the brake lights illuminate and pull along the west curb line. I'm just trying to understand what led up to this assault that took place at the vehicle.
Who's that?
At about 2:53 hours, I see a person walking, kind of looking at his phone, and he's walking northbound towards the direction of Mr. Deniso's vehicle.
Hang on, who's this? Freeze it.
The person walking behind is wearing a kind of a darker shirt, but his pants were of a light color, and is wearing white shoes. And that stood out to me. But it also looked like he was carrying an object in his hand that looked like a jacket.
Zoom in on that.
As they walked towards the vehicle, I could see it almost looked like the door was ajar at one point.
It's so far away, you can't see clearly what exactly happens. You can see movement. The one gentleman's white pants, you can see it moving, but you can't really tell what's going on.
We were really looking closely. It looks like there's a physical disturbance, a fight that happens at the vehicle.
That must be the assault. Keep playing it?
They come walking back, facing the cameras with nice bright lights. We get to see everything as they're walking toward us.
Look, he's wearing the jacket.
That's our man.
Looking at what he's wearing, a jacket with the leather along the sides, it was consistent to the attack on Mr. Wise. So I believe this was the same person.
The one gentleman was wearing a mask. We can't really see his face.
Freeze it there. Can you zoom in on the shoes?
You can see blood on his shoes. You can very plainly see it.
I believe this was blood that was from the attack with Mr. Deniso.
This is definitely our guy.
So we have our suspect at 2:59. It's within just a few blocks and an hour and a half before Mr. Weiss is assaulted. When they walk off to the south, this was also the same direction where Tony Weiss had been murdered.
But there wasn't a clear connection between both the attacks, so we didn't have a clear motive at this time.
Zoom in on the other guy.
This other person that's with our suspect, he's a high priority for us as well at this point to identify.
As officers search for the suspects, investigators meet with Tony's family.
The detective in charge was really nice. He seemed to really care if they found out who did it. which surprised me because a lot of times when somebody's homeless, they don't seem to get any attention.
Can you think of anyone who might have done this to Tony?
Tony's family had no idea who this person is that committed this offense.
We just try to get an understanding of what prompted this attack, kind of the motive behind it.
I want to assure you that we're doing everything we can to find who did this. If you know anything, we'll let you know.
Investigators review additional footage from the Trailhead Credit Union. They trace the suspect's movements following the attack on Mr. Deniso.
At the entrance to the credit union, there's a recessed alcove area where there's a camera.
There he is.
About 3:42, I observed our suspect. He was no longer with the male observed previous with the attack on Mr. Deniso. He was walking towards the ATM machine.
So I bring up that camera.
And I see a white female kind of wearing a pinkish color jacket, almost like a kind of plastic shower cap on her head, and an unknown male. I then see our suspect come into the frame of the ATM.
It's nice and clean and crisp, and it lets us see our suspect in full light.
You could really get a clear image of kind of the t-shirt that he's wearing underneath, the jacket, and that he's wearing glasses. We see that they're both interacting like they know each other.
What are they doing?
Seems like they're pushing, trying to get money out of the machine.
At one point, it looks like the female gets frustrated. Then also a moment that the suspect looks like he gets frustrated at the machine as well, and he punches the machine. When he punches the ATM, it seems like he punched the ATM with a lot of force. You could tell that something disturbed him or angered him at this point.
This is maybe 15 minutes before the actual homicide attack at Tony's tent. Is this guy gonna strike somewhere else? We're in a race against time to find this person as quickly as possible.
Looking at the video that we obtained from the Trailhead Credit Union, that was probably our clearest image that we had of the suspect. So I did a screen capture, and then I distributed that through police channels, see if they recognize the person as well.
Anything to have him back.
Investigators traced the suspect's movements after Tony Wise's murder.
Start a little after 4 a.m.
The suspect headed south after he attacked Tony. Detectives review surveillance camera footage from the likely route he walked.
There he is.
I see our suspect walking along Northwest 1st Avenue to a staircase which will lead up to West Burnside Street.
Freeze it there. Zoom in. His shoes.
You can see the blood on his shoes. It's the same person.
Keep playing.
And I can see him walking up the staircase.
Bring up the camera in West Burnside.
So then I look at additional cameras that captured West Burnside Street.
There he is.
And I observe the suspect then walk westbound towards the direction of the shoreline.
The shoreline is transitional housing for people that have been released recently from prison.
He appears to enter the front entrance of the shoreline.
I was just like, holy cow, I know where this guy lives.
Investigators send images of the suspect to local parole officers to see if they recognize him.
And we received a call from Multnomah County Probation Officer Paula Feda, who explained to us that she recognized the person as being Elijah Williams.
Yeah. What can you tell me about Elijah?
She explains to us that Elijah Williams was incarcerated for a period of time for sexual assault on a minor. And this is now living at the shoreline as kind of a transitional housing upon being released.
It all made sense. The shoreline is literally 5 blocks from where Tony Weiss was murdered. On February 19th, we established surveillance at the shoreline. Our plan was to locate Mr. Williams away from the apartment, take him into custody safely, and execute the search warrant at his residence. One of our detectives observed Mr. Williams leave the shoreline. He got on a TriMet bus, and we followed him. And once he was in a position that was safe, we took him into custody. Now we need to understand why this thing happened. We entered Elijah Williams' apartment and we recovered this jacket. We recovered the pants. We recovered the glasses.
We also saw a pair of white shoes. This was very important evidence because we knew now that we had the shoes that were used during the assault. They matched the impressions observed previously on the tent.
DNA confirmation determined that Tony Weiss's DNA was on the shoes. Luminol revealed that there was blood on the carpet at the entryway of Elijah Williams' room. They used luminol on the bathroom sink as well. We're 100% confident that we've got the right guy, that he's the person that's murdered Tony Weiss. Inside the apartment, we located what we believe to be steroids. You hear the phrase roid rage or things of that nature. That might have factored into why he acted the way he did. Elijah Williams is transported back to the Detective Division, downtown Portland.
First, detectives ask Williams about the assault on Mr. Deniso.
There was a fight. Someone called it in. Early morning hours on the 13th. I was actually one of the ones that was assaulted. You were one of the ones that was assaulted? What happened? A guy stole my friend's phone. And we confronted him about it, and he started attacking me. I did get him back. Did you get him back? I did.
He described that he was more the victim of the attack. But that was kind of the first win in the interview of just placing there on scene. Looking at the video after the attack of Mr. Deniso, see red blood on his shoes, so I don't believe that he was the victim.
And what friend was it that you were with to go confront this guy to get the phone back? It's my friend Bear. Bear?
He lays out a story where he claims that he's with his friend. We were never able to identify who this person Bear was. We start speaking with Elijah Williams about Tony Weiss, the attack on him.
There was a fight outside of the Blanchard house. Yeah, I've seen the area before in the parking lot, but I've never actually been by the Blanchard house.
At this point during the interview, he details stuff that we know is not true. The surveillance video puts him at the Blanchard house.
You can't really argue over it. The video proves the case.
Video has put you at the fight. I haven't got over there. I was in the house or whatever. Some dude told me to shut up. He came out with some pepper spray and just started closing me down. And then that's when I ran over to try to go grab it out of his hand. He started grabbing my throat and grabbed my jacket. And so I tried to like wrestle him for it, and I threw him on the ground, started kicking him.
Elijah Williams, he ultimately admits his involvement. We talked to him about the injuries, the significant damage, and just the pure violence of what the assault had done to Tony Weiss.
The male that I showed you in that picture, when he was taken to the hospital, he was treated for very serious injuries.
But he passed away, and so we can't change that.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
He ultimately regretted what he had done. It's easy to walk away from Tony Weiss, to not recognize him as a person, as a human being, because he was a homeless person.
Williams is charged with second-degree murder for killing Tony Wise and second-degree assault for the attack on Tembelani Deniso.
We were able to rule out Bear as having any involvement in the Tony Weiss murder and Deniso assault. We were also able to rule out the female at the ATM as having any involvement in the Tony Weiss murder.
Prosecutors pieced together what happened on the early morning of February 13th.
Elijah Williams, he was taking his testosterone, his steroids, drinking heavily, and decided to go out. He was at a club with a friend, and a friend's phone had been stolen.
Williams tells police that Deniso stole the phone. Williams and Bear catch up with Deniso later in the evening.
Mr. Williams brutally beat Deniso and then left him.
There is no evidence that Deniso stole any property from Williams or his friend Bear.
Elijah Williams encountered some friends, including a woman. When the suspect punches the bank machine, he looks angry and then walks off in the direction where Tony had been living. He was being loud, and Tony had told him to be quiet. They'd exchanged words, and things quickly escalated. He started stomping Tony's head and beating Tony till the point that Tony was no longer conscious. Then left the Blanchet House area, slowly made his way back to his residence. He had been drinking alcohol with the steroids that resulted in him just flying into a rage and doing what he did unprovoked without any further real explanation for it. Tony was a decent guy, and certainly no one deserved what happened to him.
Elijah Williams pleads guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter in the first degree for the killing of Tony Wise. He also pleads guilty to attempted assault in the second degree for the attack on Tembelani Deniso. The judge sentences him to 17 years in prison.
I am glad that that person is going to be in jail for a long time. I hope he doesn't get out, because I would be fearful for anybody that would be near him.
I hear a lot of people say there is no such thing as closure, but I actually think I did feel some, just because they were able to find the killer and he was brought to justice.
This surveillance video was absolutely crucial in this investigation to solve the case.
Without the video, they probably would have never found the suspect. Plain and simple. It seals the deal. The video will tell the absolute truth.
Tony, maybe he would have at least started to have some kind of a relationship with his children again, and at least see them grow up, see them have, birthdays and do all those, big events in life.
It would have been one of the nicest times of my life, being able to get him back.
Next time on See No Evil.
911.
If I could get an officer to do a welfare check on my mother.
The next steps to take is to obtain that surveillance footage.
It just drew a lot of alarm bells for everybody.
It was hard for me to realize that somebody could do this to another human being.
Let's start from the top. Did you kill her?
The year was 1991. A cold, unforgiving winter blanketed the city of Chicago. It wasn't just the cold that kept people indoors that January, it was the looming presence of something darker. On the night of January 16th, 1991, a small, quiet neighborhood in the South Side became the epicenter of a mystery that would haunt the community for years. A 7-year-old girl, Emily Watson, disappeared without a trace. Her parents, frantic, called the police in the early hours of the morning. It wasn't the first time a child had gone missing, but this was different. Emily was just gone. No signs of struggle, no ransom note, no phone call. The only thing left behind was a single, tattered stuffed bear, her favorite toy, lying in the snow, a trail of footprints leading away from it, vanishing into the night. It took hours to find the first clue. The toy, that stuffed bear, with its button eyes and worn-out fur, had been the only link to Emily. But it wasn't enough. No fingerprints, no signs of DNA, no leads, just silence. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The city was shocked. A child, gone, without a trace. It was every parent's nightmare. And yet, as the months passed, the investigation grew colder. The case went cold. Detective Mark Reynolds, the lead investigator, never stopped working on it. But despite his best efforts, Emily's case remained one of the hundreds of unsolved cases in Chicago. The community was on edge. How could something like this happen in their peaceful neighborhood? The whispers began. Could it have been someone close to the family? Could it have been a stranger? Emily's mother, devastated, withdrew into her grief. Her father, once hopeful, turned into a shadow of the man he used to be. The pain of not knowing gnawed at them both, and with every passing year, the mystery of Emily Watson's disappearance became more and more haunting. Then, years later, in 1998, something strange happened. A single lead, buried deep in the cold case files, surfaced. Detective Reynolds was long gone from the force, but he couldn't forget Emily. He'd promised her family he wouldn't stop looking. A young rookie, fresh from the academy, stumbled upon an old fingerprint analysis report, a print that had never been connected to anything, until now. The fingerprint wasn't just any fingerprint, it was from the toy, the very same stuffed bear that had been left behind in the snow. It was a print so faint it had been overlooked for years. But now, with new technology, it was clear. The print was of a person with a history that would lead Reynolds from the grave of his former career to one final shocking conclusion. But how could a fingerprint found on a child's toy lead to an arrest, and why had it taken so long for it to be found? The answer was one the city of Chicago would never forget, one that would shatter the idea of safety that people had clung to for so long. Reynolds' name came up. The rookie detective brought it to the precinct's attention. The investigation reignited, as if a ghost had returned from the past. This wasn't just a cold case anymore. It was a living, breathing nightmare about to come back to life. But that was only the beginning. The file containing the fingerprint was old, fragile, and stained from years of dust and neglect. But there it was, a partial print on the teddy bear's left paw, barely visible, almost erased by time. The rookie detective, a quiet woman named Dana Holt, couldn't shake the feeling that this print meant something. She ran it through the new AFIS database, not expecting anything. It was standard protocol, one of those mechanical gestures detectives did out of duty rather than hope. But then, late that night, the system beeped. A match. After 34 years, a name finally appeared on the screen. Frank Delaney, male, 48 years old, former maintenance worker, arrested once for trespassing near a playground in 1993, released without charges, lived less than 2 blocks away from the Watson family in 1991. Holt froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew this was it. She printed the report and walked into her captain's office at dawn. "You're not going to believe this," she said, laying the file on his desk. Within hours, the Chicago Police Department reopened one of its oldest missing child cases. The city that had long forgotten Emily Watson's name would soon remember. Detectives retraced every step of the original investigation. Old reports, grainy photographs, witness statements from neighbors who were long dead or moved away. Each document felt like an echo, voices from a time when everyone still believed Emily might be found alive. But now, with the match in hand, the focus turned to Frank Delaney. He'd lived an invisible life. No wife, no kids, no social media, no close friends. He worked odd jobs around schools, churches, and apartment buildings, always moving, always blending in. When the police finally found him, he was living on the outskirts of Joliet, in a small, decrepit house surrounded by tall weeds and rusting tools. They watched him for 3 days before making a move. On the 4th morning, they knocked. Delaney opened the door slowly. His hands shook. "Frank Delaney?" "Yeah. We need to talk." They took him downtown for questioning. No handcuffs, not yet. In the interrogation room, the silence was heavy, broken only by the buzz of the old fluorescent light above. Detective Holt sat across from him. She placed the photo of Emily on the table. "Do you know this girl?" she asked. Delaney's eyes flicked to the photo, then back down to his hands. "No," he muttered. "Never seen her." "You lived 2 blocks from her house," Holt pressed. "You worked maintenance at the elementary school she attended. So what? Your fingerprint was found on her toy." That was when his hands stopped moving. His breathing changed. Holt leaned in. "You want to tell me why?" For a moment, he didn't answer. Then a strange, low chuckle slipped out of his mouth. "That old thing," he said softly. "I didn't think anyone would ever find it." Holt's stomach turned cold. "Stomach. Find what, Frank?" she asked. He didn't respond. The room went silent again. Outside the window, 2 officers exchanged a look. One whispered, "He knows." For hours, Delaney said nothing more, just sat there staring at the photo, fingers tapping the table. Finally, he asked for a cigarette. Holt gave him one. He lit it with trembling hands. "You people never stop digging, do you?" he said, smoke curling into the stale air. "You never let the dead stay buried." "Where is she, Frank?" Holt's voice cracked. "Where is Emily Watson?" He smiled faintly. "You really want to know?" His words sent a chill down her spine. In that moment, everyone in the room knew. This wasn't just a fingerprint match. This was the beginning of a confession, one that would unearth horrors buried deep beneath the frozen soil of 1991 Chicago. The room tightened around the sound of his question, like walls shifting inward, like winter coming through a cracked window. Holt watched Delaney's eyes. No flinch now. No confusion. A man measuring the room, the air, the distance to the door, the taste of smoke in his mouth. She kept her voice steady, calm, flat. The voice you use when you're walking into a burning house and pretending it's fine. "Where is she?" A simple sentence that could break a city. He leaned back, let the chair creak. The cigarette burned low. A slow exhale, a shape of gray that curled toward the buzzing light. "You still think this is about a toy?" he said, the words almost gentle. "You still think a print tells you anything except that someone once touched something?" Another smile, small and private. A smile people get when they know the answer is locked somewhere you can't reach. Holt did not blink. She slid a small plastic bag onto the table, the old photo of the teddy bear, the close crop of the left paw, the index and partial thumb. "You touched this, Frank," she said. "In 1991. On a night a child vanished. You touched it long enough, firm enough to leave a map of your skin. That's not nothing. That's not smoke." She pushed the bag an inch closer. It made the faintest sound on the metal, like ice underfoot. "Tell me where Emily is." He watched the plastic glint. He watched the photo as if it could blink. "You came too late," he said, and the room chilled a few more degrees. "You always come too late." For a second, his gaze softened, like he was looking past Holt, past the wall, into a hallway only he remembered. "You'll dig, and you'll find the part you already wrote in your heads, the part that makes the headline neat. Cold case, missing child, community in shock." He knew the words, everyone knew the words. They hang in the air of every city long enough, and you memorize them by osmosis. Holt stood. She nodded to the glass. The door opened. The cigarette disappeared. The room reset. "We're getting a warrant," she said. "We'll do the digging ourselves." Outside, the squad room moved like a low tide, steady and workmanlike. An assistant state's attorney leaned over a printer stack, scanning lines of the affidavit. Old case numbers marched across the paper like faded street signs. 91 CPD missing EMW, a janitor's schedule from the elementary school, a maintenance log for the Watsons block, Delaney's old addresses. Trespass in 1993. A complaint from 1992 no one followed. A tip line call from an anonymous neighbor. Man with a green cap lingering by the fence, never verified. Files that weren't wrong, just unfinished. Files that sat in the quiet for 3 decades until a new finger brushed the dust. The judge signed at 11:07 a.m. The paper felt heavy in Holt's hand. By noon, unmarked cars rolled south. Joliet, late morning light, dry grass against chain link, a dog 2 yards over that barked like an alarm with a conscience. Delaney's house sat under a sky the color of old pewter. Gutters bowed, porch slanted, a spindle missing on the rail, a gap that looked like a missing tooth. Ordinary decay, the kind that hides extraordinary things. Boots on wood. A knock, then the low chorus of police voices. Delaney wasn't there. He was still downtown. The door opened under the set of a pry bar. The air met them like a stale book. Old dust, oil, something sweet, something metallic, something memory couldn't quite place. Holt stepped inside with a crime scene tech named Ruiz, who'd been in rooms like this his entire career and still never got used to the first breath. The front room was a museum of almosts. A television that worked but didn't invite, a recliner with the stuffing showing, shaped like it knew exactly one body. A calendar on the wall 5 years out of date, July paused forever on a week with no appointments. They moved slow. No hurry now. Nothing had moved in here for years that couldn't wait another 10 minutes. Kitchen, a lineup of jars with screws and nails, coffee cans with keys, a drawer of folded receipts bound by a rubber band that had melted into itself. Ruiz marked, bagged, photographed. Holt's eyes kept drifting to the back of the house, where a narrow hall bent right, where a door rested slightly ajar and revealed the first edge of a shed through a weathered back window. The shed called before the words did. She stepped outside. The yard wore its neglect like a blanket. Thistles, wind-slapped plastic, a ceramic frog half buried and staring up. The shed was the color of washed-out denim. 2 padlocks, one new and one so old it looked like it could be a prop. The new lock gave way to a key on Delaney's ring. The old one surrendered to a bolt cutter. The door opened and the day dimmed 6 degrees. Inside, wood smell, metallic smell, the hush of a place that remembers each footstep, shelves with labeled boxes, the handwriting cramped and neat. Church basement 1990, school boiler room 1989, Watson block 1991. Holt did not breathe for a second. Ruiz didn't either. Sometimes you understand before you understand. She pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. She touched only the edges. The box was light, too light to hold anything heavy, too heavy to be empty. It contained a small plastic bag with a cracked blue ribbon and a tiny bent barrette with a white enamel flower. An old neighborhood newsletter, January 1991, with a photo of a bake sale circled in red ink. A Polaroid of a snowbank, just a snowbank, no faces, no house number. But snow piled against a chain-link fence with a low, slanting pattern Holt knew from the Watson Street. The back of the Polaroid carried a date in what looked like the same cramped hand, 1/16. She didn't say Emily's name out loud. She didn't have to. Ruiz whispered anyway, as if a name could fog the air and show what had been invisible for 34 years. "We need a lab truck," he said, and the words clicked into motion. They made the calls. They sealed the shed. They pulled the other boxes. Maintenance closet keys, north annex, storage auditorium. The inventory read like a blueprint of access. Passages, pipes, hollow places. The geography of people who go everywhere unnoticed because they are the help. Because they carry a ring of keys and a toolbox and a smile that says, "I'm just fixing something behind the wall." Holt felt the city rise in her, the layers of public and private, the arteries of buildings that run in the dark. If this man hid evidence, he chose spaces where silence is structural. By late afternoon, the house and yard glowed under evidence lights. Neighbors stood at their fences with arms crossed and phones up. Someone whispered "cold case." Someone else said the girl's name like a fragile object taken down from a shelf. A boy asked his mother who Emily was, and the mother paused too long, which is how you know a wound never closed. Back at the precinct, Delaney waited. He had not asked for a lawyer. He had not asked for water. He had asked once to see the sky. The detective watching him said no with his eyes and yes with his posture, the way officers do when they want to keep the temperature in a room exactly where it is. Holt walked in with a photo from the shed. Not the barrette, the Polaroid of the snowbank. She placed it on the table. She did not sit. "What is this?" she asked, not as a question, but as a test. He studied it as if he'd forgotten, and maybe he had. Maybe when you keep a secret long enough, it becomes a room you no longer enter. "Winter," he said. "It's your handwriting," Holt said. "January 16th, the night she disappeared, the fence on Emily's block. You were there." He gave a slow nod, the kind people give when the truth turns a corner and finds them sitting on the step. "Everybody was there," he said, "the whole street, looking, calling." He looked up. "I helped look. You don't write that down in your file." "You wrote this down," Holt said, "and you put it in a box labeled with her block, and you kept a child's barrette." Her voice didn't rise, it thinned. "Why would you keep a child's barrette?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table, the body language of a man who wants to be believed. "I found it by the alley fence 2 days later," he said. "I turned it in. Your guys said it didn't match. No prints, no DNA back then. They gave it back to me when they cleaned out the tip table. Trash, that's what they called it." He looked at the photo again. "I kept some trash." Holt watched the story for seams. It wasn't the worst lie. It wasn't the worst truth. Files did get purged. Evidence did get lost. Boxes did get misnamed. The system had holes in it big enough to fall through. But the barrette, the specific, the ribbon, the date, the house where a man lives alone with labeled boxes that map a city's quiet, the fingerprint on the toy. She slid another photo across, a color print taken an hour earlier by Ruiz. The barrette next to a ruler, the enamel flower chipped. "Emily wore one like this," she said. She was a kid, he said. Lots of kids wore flowers. You told me we came too late, Holt said. He tilted his head. I said you always come too late. Silence pooled for a beat. She felt the weight of her badge, the weight of the winter in that sentence. She changed angle. In 91, you worked nights at the elementary school. You handled the trash. You had keys to the auditorium and the North Annex. Did you handle the lost and found? I handled everything nobody wanted, he said, and the line cut the room clean. The lab called. Ruiz again, voice tight with the electricity of the almost. We pulled latent off the Polaroid, he said. Left edge partial. Could be his. Could be older. The barrette came up with trace that could match the Watson carpet. Old fibers, beige, loop pile. We're comparing the weave. Holt hung up and looked at Delaney. There is a moment in every cold case where time feels like a third person in the room, where the room begins to hold the present and the year of the crime in the same air. She opened the file again, the original missing flyer, the little rectangle that had been stapled to grocery store corkboards and church doors. Emily's smile and overexposure, a shadow of her mother's hand on the margin from where she pressed the paper too hard when photocopying, a city's prayer reduced to black toner. Holt placed it beside the Polaroid. If you kept trash, she said, you kept souvenirs. His eyes flickered. Not guilt. Recognition. Souvenir, he said softly, tasting the syllables, as if trying on a coat from 3 decades ago. You want to turn me into a headline. I know how this goes. Cold case solved. Monster in a shed. Key ring of the damned. You'll get your cameras outside. You'll read and they'll nod because it makes the world simple again. You kept the barrette, Holt said. He shrugged. Maybe I thought someone would come ask for it. No one would know you had it unless you told them. I'm telling you now. She took a step closer. Tell me where she is. He stared at the Polaroid so long the room stilled. When he finally spoke, the words were so soft they almost didn't exist. The church, he said. Everything in Holt drew into a point. Which church? St. Bridget, he said, basement, north wall. Ruiz didn't let the second ring finish. St. Bridget, he repeated into the phone, writing as he spoke. The church stood 4 blocks from the Watson house, brick and soot and stained glass that held the sun like a secret. The basement was a warren, pantry, closet, boiler, a forgotten playroom with a mural of Noah's Ark where the animal's eyes had turned the color of dust. Volunteers had moved food in and out for 30 years. Kids had learned catechism and then forgotten it. The north wall had been patched twice, once after a pipe burst in 1998, once after a flood in 2007. No one remembers walls. People remember altars. By early evening, the church doors stood open on a cold light. The parish priest watched from the nave, hands folded, faced the expression every priest learns, sorrow as hospitality. Holt moved through the basement with the cautious speed of a person who doesn't want to wake a sleeping house. The north wall showed 2 squares of new plaster against old, the ground cold underfoot, the air thin, as if it had a story to tell and had been waiting for an audience that would listen all the way through. They brought a handheld scanner. They ran it along the wall. A dull sound, a denser sound, a sudden hollow where hollow shouldn't be. Ruiz marked it with tape, a small blue X on an old white paint that had turned the color of tea. We're going to open, he said. Holt stood back. No one spoke. No one joked. No one said, here we go. They cut carefully, in a square inside the square, and what was behind the plaster was not a body, not remains, not the kind of scene that breaks a room forever. It was a box, a shoe box, inside a plastic bag, taped shut, sealed like someone had tried to keep water out and time away. Ruiz lifted it like you lift a baby bird. He set it on a table. He cut the tape with the gentleness of a librarian. The room held its breath. Inside lay a second teddy bear, smaller than the first, missing an ear, with a ripped seam that had been repaired with blue thread and clumsy X's. A bracelet with plastic beads that spelled EM. 2 Polaroids, both of snowbanks. A folded map of the neighborhood with a route traced in red marker from the Watson house to the church basement door. An old brass key with a tag that read storage. And under the bear, a postcard from a hardware store with a list in pencil. Bleach, rags, gloves, plaster. The card was dated January 17th, 1991. Someone said the child's name without meaning to. Holt didn't speak at all. She felt the city inhale. She felt the weight of the word solve step to the threshold and not cross. Evidence, yes. Story, yes. Location, yes. But the absence at the center still held. Emily was not here, not in the wall, not in the box. The box was a message, not an answer, a map, not a destination. Holt carried the bracelet between gloved fingers. EM, not the whole name, a child's half-finished word. He kept these to keep the day from floating away, Ruiz said, and Holt didn't know if he meant Delaney or the city. They sealed the box. They photographed every angle. They logged the key, the map, the postcard, the bear. They lifted latent from cardboard that might hold the sweat of a night 3 decades back. They walked upstairs and the priest lowered his eyes as if to say a blessing over what was found and what was not. Back at the precinct, Holt set the shoebox on the metal table and watched Delaney's face as he looked inside. No twitch, no horror, just a weary nod, like a man who has been expecting a late guest. "You kept this," she said. "You hid this in a wall." "I kept what you would throw away," he said. "You kept a map." "I kept proof that somebody cared enough to look." She placed the brass key on the photo of the snowbank. The tag said storage in a script that matched his boxes. "What does this open?" He looked at the key for a long time, then at Holt, then at the wall. "A room where no one looks," he said, and then so quiet it sounded like a thought he hadn't meant to share. "You'll need to go under the stage." Under the stage hung in the room like a cord you could pull to bring down the entire set. Holt didn't react in front of him. She closed the box. She pocketed the brass key. She left Delaney with the snowbank photos staring up at the dead light. In the hallway, voices sharpened, shoes quickened. Warrants, school district liaison, custodian on call. The old auditorium at Emily's Elementary had been renovated 3 times, which usually means everything old is still there, just painted. Ruiz met her at the elevator with a thermos and a clipped sentence. If he built a room, nobody saw it because they thought it already belonged. Night pressed on the glass. The school sat square and tired at the end of a residential block where trees had learned the shapes of the roofs. A security light hummed at the loading bay. The principal showed up in a windbreaker over pajamas, nerves hiding under manners. "This is about the cold case," she said, as if naming it made the building exhale. Holt nodded once. No preamble. The custodian arrived 5 minutes later with a key ring the size of a life. Some keys shone. Some were black with time. When Holt showed him the brass key-tagged storage, he frowned with the recognition of an old ache. "That's pre-renovation," he said. "If it opens anything, it opens something no one wanted to budget for." They went in through the back corridor. The auditorium was a sleeping animal, rows like ribs, staged like a jaw. The curtains were newer, heavy and bright. But the rafters were old, the ropes were old, the wooden floor of the stage had that patient beat-down shine that takes decades. A ghost light stood at center, a single bulb on a pole the color of backstage dust. Ruiz swept it with his eyes the way he always does, measuring, listening. Holt walked to the wings and looked for what doesn't belong. A square of wood that doesn't creak the same, a seam too straight, a screw that isn't painted. She found screws, 4 of them, newer than their neighbors, set into a plank at stage right near the wall where sound collects. She crouched. She listened to the hollow under the wood. A cavity. Not big, not meant for a person to enter easily. A person with a key could, though. A person with patience. Ruiz knelt beside her. They photographed the screws. They logged the measurements. The custodian handed over a small driver set with hands that shook despite the steadiness of routine. Ruiz backed the screws out, slow, so slowly you could hear threads complain. The plank lifted, dark below. Air that hadn't moved in years came up like a memory. Holt slid a flashlight beam into the opening. Dust crystals hung and turned like snow under a street lamp. The space was about 3 feet high. A crawl, a tunnel maybe, or a stopgap between joists. A place the renovation forgot. They clipped on masks. They tucked pant cuffs. Holt went first because she always did. Ruiz followed, shoulders sideways, breath measured through the filter like counting heartbeats. Under the stage, wood became language. Joists, braces, cross members, a geometry of decisions made by men in coveralls whose names no plaque remembers. It smelled like varnish and old rope and damp cardboard. Near the opening, there were scuffs that didn't belong to rats. Too tidy, a path. Holt pointed. Ruiz nodded. They followed the scuffs to a plywood panel with a cheap hasp and a locked padlock painted the color of theater floor. The brass key in Holt's pocket felt warm as a coin you've been holding too long. It fit. It turned with a small complaint, and then a clean surrender. The panel swung out on hinges that had been oiled in another decade. Behind it, a cavity the size of a trunk. Inside that, a plastic bin with a lid that had been sealed with blue painter's tape and then taped again with clear packing tape. Someone concerned with neatness. Someone who liked layers. Ruiz cut the tape along the seam as if performing surgery on a memory. He lifted the lid. On top lay a child's sneaker, small white, turned bone yellow, side stripe a faint ghost of blue. The laces were missing. The heel was scuffed in a pattern that said playground, not track. A Ziploc bag held a paper library card with a cracked laminate. Name in pencil, Emily W. A second bag held hair ties, 2 pink, 1 cracked, one with a stray strand caught and fossilized in dust. A folded flyer for the January 1991 winter pageant on school letterhead, edges browned, someone's doodle of stars in the margin. A paper timetable for custodial shifts, with Delaney's last name penned in 3 times in a week, and beneath that, wrapped in a dish towel, an inhaler with a pharmacy label that still carried the ghost of adhesive and a name that made the light inside Holt's chest dim: Emily Watson. No bones, no graphic horror, just an archive of a day that broke a neighborhood. Ruiz whispered the word he always uses when artifacts refuse to stay only objects. Presents. Holt bagged each item, fingers exact, eyes writing a report paragraph by paragraph across the air. The sneaker's sole bore a pebbled pattern. The rubber carried tiny grooves where grit had pressed and stayed. She took shots of the tread, the toe, the heel. She took one of the inhaler's dose counter, 089. She didn't let herself ask if that number had lived at 90 that morning in January 1991. Farther back in the cavity sat a portable cassette recorder, the kind with a clack and a hum that could outlive newer machines by stubbornness alone. A cassette inside with a label that had bled into illegibility. Ruiz photographed, bagged, set it aside like an egg. Next to it, a rules sign for the auditorium taped from the back. No running, no food, no backstage. The backstage on the sign had dented edges, as if a thumb had pressed it too often. Holt stared at those letters longer than she meant to. No backstage is another way of saying the room where no one looks. She looked. She swept the beam along the joists. On one crosspiece, faint, almost lost under dust, was a mark in pencil, a line, a notch, a tiny hash next to the number 91. Someone keeping score or time or hoping one day they'd be able to tell a story that wasn't believed until labeled. Holt took the photograph. She pressed her palm flat against the wood above her head. The stage hummed faintly with the memory of a choir that had once stood above this exact place and sang about a light that shines in the darkness. Back in the auditorium, under the ghost light, she laid out what they had on a wheeled cart draped with clean butcher paper. The principal pressed a fist to her mouth when she saw the library card. The custodian whispered, "I'm sorry," to a floor that couldn't absolve him of anything except years. Holt didn't explain. She didn't widen the circle. She moved the cart back of house. She called the ASA. "We have items directly connected to the victim kept in a concealed space under the stage accessed with the suspect's key," she said, the cadence of law cooling the heat in her throat. "We have the inhaler with a label. We have the sneaker. We have a recorder. We'll need a lab tech with a clean deck to open the cassette." They carried the bin to the mobile lab. Ruiz gloved fresh. He popped the tabs on the recorder. The cassette clicked out like a reluctant confession. He rewound it with a pencil because some habits keep you precise. He hit play. The tape hissed first, then the building. A muffled hum, a faint echo, the sound of big air in a big room. After that, footsteps, slow, then faster, the way kids run when adults aren't watching. Laughter. A child's laugh cut off quickly as if told to be quiet. Another sound then, hard to place, like a door latch. Then the scrape of something dragged over wood. And then silence that wasn't silence at all. Heat pipes ticking, rope moving, the stage breathing like an animal asleep. At the 42-second mark, a voice, not a child, an adult, low, careful, Midwest vowels softened by cigarettes. "No backstage," the voice said, as if reading the sign. A pause, a whisper none of them could parse. The tape fuzzed, dropped, rose. At 1 minute 32, a quick intake of breath, a small cough, then a faint plastic clack, the sound an inhaler makes when you press and breathe in hope. After that, the tape ran to hiss, and then the click of a stop button pressed by a different day. No names, no dates spoken aloud, but time had a way of writing itself into devices, into dust, into the way you handle an object when you think no one is watching. Ruiz's face turned into the set of a man who had heard enough to carry it home without putting it down. Holt nodded to the tech to bag the recorder and the cassette twice, to label in heavy block letters, to log as if the world depended on it, because it did. Holt went back to the precinct with the inhaler in a hard case and the sneaker wrapped like a relic. Delaney looked up when she entered as if he had counted the steps. She set the case on the table. She did not open it. "Under the stage," she said, as if confirming a meeting time. He smiled without humor. "A room where no one looks," he repeated. "You found it." "You built it." "I found it the way I found the barrette," he said. "I kept what you would have thrown away. The school throws away more than the city. Did you know that? Lost and found becomes lost and gone every June." "You recorded children," Holt said. He blinked. For a second, surprise cracked the patina. "I recorded rooms," he said. "Rooms have hearts. You can hear them if you listen. The auditorium sounds like a lung. The church basement sounds like a cellar that knows secrets. The elementary hallway at night sounds like a bus station for ghosts." He looked at the closed case on the table. "You want me to say I took her? I want you to tell me what happened," Holt said. He leaned back. He let the chair carry his weight like a trust exercise. "You won't believe the version that doesn't make the headline neat," he said softly. You want the man with the toolbox to be the monster. It's efficient. It satisfies the word solved. You touched her toy. I fixed a lot of things I didn't break, he said. I carried a lot of things that weren't mine. Somebody left that bear in the snow. He tapped the table with one finger, a soft rhythm, a metronome. You should be asking why the map led you to the church and not to the dumpster behind the cafeteria. Holt let the rhythm run. She watched the pattern of his tapping. She imagined the understage dark. She imagined 7-year-old breath, quick, then slower. The cold case was no longer just a file. It was a room you could crawl into and put your hand on its wooden ceiling and feel the weight of a stage and a choir in a city. Who had a key to the choir door in 1991, she asked. He smiled, small and tired. Everyone who thought they needed it. The choir director? The volunteers. The priest? The parent committee. And you? I was the man with the keys, he said. The man who makes the backstage safe so the show goes on. Nobody watches the man with the keys. He looked at the case again, not at the lock, but at the edges, at the seam where plastic meets aluminum. If you think you can reach into 34 winters and pull out a single pair of hands, you're new to this city. She didn't respond. She opened the case. She laid the inhaler on a piece of white paper like snow. She set the sneaker beside it. Emily Watson, she said, not to accuse, not to bait, but to set the name at the center of the room where it had always belonged. This is not a prop. He stared at the objects with the fatigued attention of a man who has stared at versions of them for half his life. You remember the headline, he said. Chicago 1991 cold case solved. Fingerprint on toy leads to arrest. It writes itself. You can hear the press trucks warming even now. You don't have to write yourself into it, Holt said. You can tell me where she is and end something you kept alive. He swallowed. The shift was small, the kind of human thing guilt or exhaustion can produce without permission. Under the stage is not a grave, he said. Then where? He looked at the wall as if it held a map in negative. Rooms move, he said. Walls shift. People build new rooms over old mistakes. The church wall was patched twice. The school stage was rebuilt. The city covered its holes. You want me to point at a square of concrete and say, it's there. But if I say that and you open it and it's not there, who will you be tomorrow? Holt let the quiet spread. She could push, she could threaten, she could play the tape again and haunt the air. Instead, she said, who else had a map? He closed his eyes as if it hurt to look back. There was a man who wore a green cap, he said at last. He helped with the winter pageant. He carried ladders and smiled at everybody, and no one learned his last name. He could walk anywhere with that cap and that ladder. People move out of cities. They grow different faces. They get softer eyes. They die. But ladders don't forget. He opened his eyes. You'll find his name in a volunteer ledger nobody thought to scan. Holt stood. She gathered the case. She nodded at the window. The door opened. Outside, the squad room glowed with monitors and microwaves, and the energy of a city trying to solve itself before morning. Ruiz handed her a photocopy from a bank of dusty boxes the church had delivered an hour earlier. Volunteer sign-in January 1991. A first name, Ray. A scribble for a last name that could be Dell or Dellin or Dell. A phone number with 2 digits faded away. Under occupation, contractor. Under notes, ladder. The outline began to move like a shadow finding its owner. Holt didn't say solved. She said, we find Ray. Then she looked back at Delaney, who watched her with the expression of a man who has been inside too many rooms built on top of other rooms. He tilted his head as if to hear the city breathe. You always come too late, he repeated, not as a taunt now, but as a eulogy. Holt put her hand on the door. Not tonight, she said. And in the auditorium across town, the ghost light burned steady over a dark wooden mouth that had finally started to speak. They started with a name that wasn't a name. A scribble that looked like a cough on paper. Ray Dell. Something. Green cap. Ladder. Contractor. The ledger smelled like old basements and blessed candles. The ink bleached by time until it looked like rain in winter light. Holt ran a finger under the phone number missing 2 digits like teeth. You find the missing pieces by building the mouth around them. Area code. Known exchanges from 1991. Church volunteers tended to live within 8 blocks. She mapped it with a pencil she didn't intend to keep. The city looked back at her with the patience of stone. Ruiz triangulated. Parish rosters, food pantry deliveries, archdiocese maintenance invoices. The winter pageant program listed stage setup Ray D on a line between lighting, Mr. Pavlik, and snow machine borrowed. A first letter can be a door if you lean on it long enough. He fed the volunteer ledger into a flatbed scanner that had retired twice and still worked better than new things. He adjusted contrast until the D became a D, and the next curl turned to side into Del, or Della, or Delo. The room filled with versions of a man, all wearing the same cap. Holt didn't wait. She walked 2 blocks to a storefront where a sign in the window promised keys cut while you wait, even though nobody waited for keys anymore. The owner was a man built like an old cash register, solid and reliable, and louder than he meant to be. He had worked there since 1986. He had a way of remembering faces by what they asked for. She showed him the photocopy of the sign-in sheet, the one with the stubborn surname. He squinted. He tapped the counter twice, the way people do when a thought's on the runway. Ray Dellan, he said, like it surprised him to hear it out loud. Or Delland. No, Dellan. He bought ladder feet, twice. Rubber caps, green cap too. Never took it off. Smelled like drywall. Smiled with his teeth closed. You know the type? She did. Men with jobs that sweat and a politeness that lives in the shoulders. He cut keys for the church door in the choir closet back then. He could have cut one more without announcing it. Holt asked about records. He shook his head and then pointed at a wall of banker's boxes stacked like the idea of memory. Receipts from the 90s, he said. My wife won't let me throw things out because every time I do, the police come asking. They opened boxes, carbon paper side. Ink ghosts lifted their hands. Ruiz found a receipt stapled to a postcard with the hardware store's logo in a font the city outgrew. Bleach, rags, gloves, plaster. January 17th, 1991. Cash. A signature that looked like a lake on a windy day. R. Dellan. The postcard twins the one from Delaney's wall box, same font, same tiny snowflake watermark on the corner. Holt felt the steadiness of a line drawn through 3 decades. She bagged the receipt, she bagged the staple. Staples hold fingerprints too if the world is careful. Back at the lab, the cassette got a cleaner listen. They pulled room tone, filtered the hiss, lifted the low hum into something you could see on a screen like weather. At 31 seconds, a clatter that could be a ladder settling. At 1 minute, a murmur shaped like the phrase, hold the door. The voice on No Backstage sat at 165 hertz, with harmonics that matched Delaney's interrogation audio at 3 anchor points. But at 19 seconds, there was a second voice, higher, crisp, clipped vowels, 4 syllables nobody could make mean anything until a tech who grew up on the block said, wait, that's not words. That's the scrape of a metal cap being twisted on a pipe. A stagehand sound, a contractor sound. Men who live around ropes and screws know that dialect by ear. Holt sent a plainclothes pair to the DMV microfilm room under City Hall that smells like toner and nostalgia. They found a 1990 record for a 1978 Ford Econoline registered to Raymond Dellan. Address a boarding house off Archer that burned in 1999. No forwarding after that. No clean line. A man who moved or a man who stopped. They walked that block anyway, the charred lot now a discount lot for used cars. Flags flapping with enthusiasm even the sky couldn't match. A guy in a trailer office remembered a Ray who fixed a door that wouldn't shut, and always wore that damn green hat. No last name. Nobody ever learns last names when the work is heavy and the goodbye is quick. They knocked on the choir director's door 3 neighborhoods east, a woman with a spine made of metronomes who retired in 2004 and still tuned her kettle whistle to A440. Her living room held a neat stack of VHS tapes labeled with a hand that had guided small hands for years. Winter Pageant, January 1991. She slid it into a VCR that had outlived 3 televisions. The image quivered, then settled. Paper snowflakes hung like polite ghosts. Children sang in a key that aimed for joy and landed near courage. Holt leaned forward when a shadow crossed the wings. A man with a ladder. A green cap. The frame stuttered when the camera bumped against a pew. But Ruiz caught a profile, the slope of a nose, the habit of turning the face away when eyes look. He froze the frame, took a photo of the TV, then photographed the reflection in the glass for the angle the lens softened. You learn tricks when you chase time. The forensics team called about the inhaler. The pharmacy listed on the label had changed hands twice, but the data lived like the city's stubborn. Emily's prescription dates matched the file. The National Drug Code format stamped on the plastic put the device's manufacture in late 1990. Old stickers carry oils like flowers carry bees. They lifted a smear that mapped to a ridge pattern inconsistent with Delaney's right thumb. Not proof. Not nothing. A second hand on the object that kept a child's breath inside it for a second longer than the world allowed. The lab said wait for comparison. Holt said compare to whom? The lab said find your Ray. The news caught the scent. The phrase cold case slid into lower thirds. Neighbors posted photos of candlelight vigils that looked like the city trying to teach itself to glow. A tabloid ran Delaney's den with a photo of the shed taken from the alley through a chain-link circumference. Calls poured in, anonymous, urgent, useless, human. I saw a man with a green cap near the park in 1992. I remember a ladder on a truck that said Ray on the door. I kept a flyer all these years. Does that help? Everything helps if the detective wants it to. Everything hurts if the detective wants to sleep. Holt didn't sleep. She printed the volunteer ledger again, the one with the phone number with missing teeth. You fill numbers by knowing the city's habits. In 1991, that block ran on 312, then on 773 later. Exchanges near the church started 522, 523, 585. She ran permutations through a spool of old reverse directories someone at records kept like a chest of toys. R. Dellin, R. Dellin, R. Dellers. One hit wanted to be a hit. R. Delland, Archer Avenue, a phone disconnected in 1993. Connected again in 1995 under D. Rayland at a different address. Aliases are often typos that get comfortable. She sent a car to the 1995 address anyway. A woman answered in slippers designed to make you forgive everything. Don't know him, she said. Knew a Ray who fixed my screen door. Green cap, quiet. No, she didn't know a last name. Ray is always next door, carrying a toolbox like a passport that works in any country. Ruiz tracked purchases of ladder feet in January 1991 using SKU codes from the key shop boxes and a ledger from the Ace on Halstead, whose owner had an accountant son who loved neatness like oxygen. 2 pairs sold in a week. Cash sales, but one receipt had Ray written on top, a cashier's habit that means nothing and sometimes everything. Holt held the paper and listened to it. Paper can tell you if the hand shook, if the writer pressed hard, if the pen was new. This pen was cheap and old and left a faint carve that Ruiz photographed with an oblique light. The carve showed an attempt at a last name that started Dell and collapsed. You can see a man hesitate in the groove his pen leaves. You can see a choice get made. Delaney sat in interview 2 and watched the clock like it owed him to pass back with interest. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He asked for the tape. Holt didn't play it for him again. She slid a printout instead. The VHS frame of Green Cap Man carrying a ladder across the wings. He smiled like a person looking into a mirror hung too high. That cap's not mine, he said. A lot of men carried ladders. Holt nodded. She set the Ace receipt down. She set the hardware postcard. She set the inhaler photo like a tiny tombstone. Who is Ray? She asked. The question hung, taut, a trapeze waiting to see who jumps first. He didn't. He stared at the items like a man imagining the underwater shape of a bridge. You're making a collage, he said finally. Everything fits if you glue hard enough. Show me the seam I shouldn't trust, Holt said. He tapped the receipt with a fingernail, listening to its pitch. The man who buys plaster buys it because he knows how walls lie, he said. Ask the priest who called him. Ask who donated the plaster. Ask which parishioner did work for free to feel useful. They did. The priest had inherited the church in 2005 with a box of keys and a stack of memories that weren't his. He called an old deacon who called a cousin who used to run a contracting crew out of a garage near the viaduct. Ray Dellin? The cousin said. We had a Ray. He worked off and on, quiet, good up on ladders, kept to himself. He stopped showing up after your year. Moved, I think, or got sick. I got a sign-in sheet and a file somewhere. The file came in a manila folder smelling like storage that had learned to be brave. The signature matched the hardware receipt's lake, R. Dellin. Next to it, in another hand, a note. Green hat, brings own ladder. People write the prop list when they don't know the actor's name. Holt followed cash like it was a person. A pawn shop under the tracks had a record of a ladder sold in spring 1991 for $20 and a promise. The clerk had written Ray G in the margin because he thought he heard a G when the man said his last name. The ladder brand matched the rubber feet SKU from the key shop, Werner. A woman 2 doors down remembered a man scraping plaster dust off his cuffs with the edge of a library card and laughing when it left a line. She remembered because she liked the sound of that laugh and didn't trust it. Memory is a jury that never adjourns. The lab called, with something harder than maybe. A latent from the brass storage key tag matched the partial left thumbprint lifted from the inhaler label adhesive. Not enough points to clear the courtroom on its own. Enough to draw a circle around a pair of hands that weren't Delaney's. The old AFIS had no Ray Dellin. But Holt remembered the trespass report from 1993, the one that never charged and never closed. A man stopped near a playground fence at dusk. The officer wrote Ray D under name because sometimes the name part of an encounter won't give you the courtesy of finishing. The officer had retired to Florida. He answered on the second ring with the ocean trying to sound helpful in the background. Green cap, he said before she finished the question. Climbed a ladder like it was a friend. Said he was a contractor. Hands like sandpaper. No ID. Said his employer kept his union card. I let him go because the world was different then. He paused so long you could hear the surf adjust its shoulders. The world was always the same, he said quietly. We were different. They put the composite on a corkboard, knowing that corkboards are superstitions in modern police work. A profile with no face sits there anyway because detectives are human, not machines. Ray Dellon, the card read. Age then, late 20s to mid-30s. Now, mid-60s to 70. Distinguishing, green cap, habit of carrying his own ladder, careful handwriting that fails under pressure, possible contractor network around Archer and Halstead, known to church volunteers. Last seen, 1991, 1993. Possible boarding house fire victim, possible alias user, possible disappearance into the city's soft parts where paperwork goes to watch trains. Holt pushed into the boarding house fire reports, names half recorded, evacuees turned into initials when nobody claimed them. One sheet listed R. Della, with a dash where the rest should be. Hospital intake log same night had a male mid-30s, treated for smoke inhalation, refused admit, left AMA, no name. The nurse wrote green hat in the margin like a question to a future that may one day answer. The hospital basement produced a box labeled 1991 Miss C, where everything people forgot to file lived with grace. Inside, a bagged wool cap, dark green gone gray at the rim. The label said found in ER waiting Jan, no DNA in 1991, DNA now. They cut fibers with the reverence of archivists. They pulled sweat salts and skin cells from the band's seam. Partial profile, enough to exclude Delaney, enough to need a someone to match. The city rarely gives you that someone without asking for a pound of sleep. The principal called at 2:14 a.m. because the doors of this case had stopped respecting business hours. Her voice carried church basement echo into the phone line. A retired teacher had just messaged her a photo from 1991, the winter pageant rehearsal, shot side stage by a parent who had a Nikon and ambition. Children milling, a ladder like a question mark leaning near the curtain. A man in a green cap looking away from the lens the way people do when they don't know a camera is a kind of future. The teacher had written names on the back in jaunty blue. Ms. Carter, Jimmy K., Ray. Ray without a last name, but Ray big enough to fill the space. Holt took the photo into the light like she was introducing it to daylight for the first time. The resolution was better than VHS. The profile was more honest than memory. She sent it to the facial recognition team, knowing it would spit out 10,000 garbage hits, and one maybe. Garbage is the toll you pay to cross certain bridges. She went back to interview 2 with the photo in an envelope she didn't intend to open right away. Delaney watched her as if her steps were breaking news. "You found him," he said, not a question. She placed the envelope against the edge of the table and let it exist there like a weather system off the coast. "We found a photograph," she said. "We found a receipt. We found a hat. We found your voice saying a sentence next to another voice that might be a man who liked to work where eyes aren't." She leaned. The voice flattened to a whisper that held more heat than a shout. "You tell me if Ray took her." He looked at the envelope like a man reading his reflection in a window at midnight. "You want it to be him," he said. "It would be clean, cleaner than me. The man with the ladder, the green cap, the handyman ghost who walks through the pages and leaves chalk footprints." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they had the shine of someone deciding between 2 bad types of quiet. "He knew the stage better than I did," he said finally. "He added the panel. He told me he'd make the trapdoor look like it had always been there. He said if we fix things right, nobody notices the fixing." "What did he fix on January 16th, Holt asked. "He fixed a door," Delaney said, "and then he fixed a silence." The sentence landed like a nail driven by a steady hand. Ruiz stepped to the glass, a nod. The ASA was ready to authorize a second site search based on emergent statements. Holt stood. "We're going back under," she said, not to Delaney, not to anyone in particular, but to the building that had started to give up its secrets like a tired singer handing the microphone to the crowd. The ghost light in the auditorium burned a little brighter, or maybe that was just what happens when your eyes adjust to a darkness you've decided not to accept anymore. The auditorium swallowed them whole again, same ghost light, same patient wood, same breath held by a room that had learned to listen. Holt moved like she'd been here all her life. Tape off, tools out. The hatch they'd opened once already stared back with its neat screws like a dare. Under the stage, air colder than night slid along the floor and stuck to skin. Ruiz checked his mask, clicked his lamp, and followed her down, boots whispering on joists that remembered other feet and kept those names to themselves. They didn't go to the bin, not to the spot they'd already mapped with photos and numbers. Holt went farther to the seam where the underfloor bracing changed grain. New wood laid against old modern screws, muscling past square nails from a different carpenter century. The brass key in her pocket felt heavier here, like metal knows its room. She found another panel by sound before sight, a hollow with a higher note when you tap it, a drum inside a violin. She touched the paint and it came away on her glove as chalky powder, a color too clean for the rest of the underworld, like someone had repainted this patch alone and called it invisible. The hasp on this panel wasn't a padlock. It was a pair of deck screws sunk deep and painted to pretend they'd been born there. Ruiz turned them a quarter, then stopped and photographed the threads because sometimes a thread keeps the story straight. He backed them out slow and slid the panel toward him an inch. Wood sighed. Holt lowered her light. Behind the plank, a narrow channel ran right, a crawl tight enough to decide who wanted truth and who wanted knees. She went in, shoulders grazing joists, lamp throwing a tunnel on splinters that looked like stalactites. The wood smelled like old varnish and long shows. Her glove brushed a flaky stripe of blue where a seam had been mended with thread someone chose from a kitchen junk drawer because it was handy. The same blue as the clumsy X's on the second teddy bear. Details are the city's fingerprints. At the bend, the space opened by inches, enough to hold a hand, a bin, a decision. Something lay there wrapped in plastic with the care of a person who believes tape makes time behave. A painter's bucket lid cut in a clean circle covered the mouth of a small void the size of a mailbox. Ruiz levered the lid up with a putty knife, slow, as if the room might spook. Inside, a manila envelope sealed with brittle tape, a hardware tag stuck to it like a limp tongue. The tag read, "Storage," in the same tight script from the brass key, a matching hand that liked labels more than witnesses. Holt eased the envelope out, and the paper breathed like an old book. She set it on a clean mat. She broke the tape with a scalpel. Ruiz rolled video because hands forget and lenses don't. Polaroids slid into the light, snowbanks again, same fence pattern, a set of small footprints veering toward the church alley, then stopping where the picture stopped, a story trimmed by a white border. On the back of one, block letters pressed hard enough to bruise the paper. EM. Not a full name. A child's way of writing the start before getting called to dinner. Beneath the photos sat a folded leaflet for the winter pageant rehearsal schedule with a circled call time. A scrap of green fabric, knit, 2 stitches running, 1 stitch broken, the fiber the exact tired green of the ER cap from 1991. And at the bottom, a stub of receipt glued to the corner like a poor man's filing system. Jan 1791, the hardware store's little snowflake watermark visible in the glue wave. Bleach, rags, gloves, plaster, same list, same day. Different place to hide the proof that somebody planned to bury something other than a body. "This isn't a room," Ruiz said under his breath. "It's a record." "Records confess when people won't," Holt said, and bagged the fabric, the envelope, the hard block letters that looked like the hand of someone unused to names. She drew the map out in her head. The church wall, this tunnel, the panel Delaney admitted he didn't build, the corridor that green-cap man would have known better than any teacher. Stages draw men who like to be behind curtains. They backed out slow. Dust turned to a galaxy in their lamps and drifted down again on silence. In the wing, the ghost light looked like a witness that refused sleep. They rolled the evidence cart into the mobile lab. The tech lifted a fiber with tweezers and sang quietly without meaning to, a work song that sounded like breath-counting steps. Under the microscope, the green yarn's twist matched the ER cap's seam. Not a courtroom match yet. A direction. Threads obey physics the way stories obey pain. Holt asked for a ground-penetrating radar sweep under the stage because people hide history in soil when wood isn't patient enough. A cart that looked like a baby stroller for a ghost rolled across boards while the tech watched the tablet the way sailors used to watch horizons. Spikes, voids, old conduits, an unexpected density at stage left, where a cross brace shadowed the crawl. "Either a beam that shouldn't be there," the tech said, "or something poured that wasn't on the plan." They chalked an X no actor would ever see. Holt slid back into the crawl with a borescope like a silver worm and fed the lens through a sliver at the base of the brace. The screen showed concrete, smooth, then not smooth, then a shadow line where concrete met a different texture. She held her breath, and the lamp heat got into her knuckles. "He poured a plug," she said. They called the ASA again. Words steady, voice cool. Emergent concealment, probable cause to penetrate the artificial structure. The permission came with the lawyer's cadence of caution. Ruiz scored a neat square and set a coring rig like a dentist who hates lies. The core bit, dust plumed. The stage shivered a fraction, remembering all the shoes that had danced above this and never known what lay inches away. The bit hit something softer with a sound that isn't wood and isn't air. Ruiz killed the motor. Holt knelt. She cleared dust with a brush. Metal. The corner of a small lockbox, the cheap kind that keeps honest people honest and dishonest people pleased with themselves. He worked a pry along the seam until it surrendered like a secret that got tired of sitting in the dark. Inside, a brass choir door key-tagged choir in that same disciplined hand, a string of cheap plastic beads that spelled E, one bead missing where a string had snapped long ago. A strip of denim hem with a fray that matched the photo of Emily's jacket in the original missing flyer. A hem notch her mother had made to tell the jacket from another child's at the coat rack. A folded newspaper clipping the size of a palm. Missing girl. Dateline January 17th, 1991. Edges worn like it had been read by thumbs that didn't deserve the ache they carried. Under that, a slip of thin paper torn from a pharmacy bag. Use as directed, a sticker's echo clinging to the corner, the ghost of an adhesive that had once lived on an inhaler. The lockbox smelled like old paper and fear made tidy. Holt didn't say the word solved. She felt the word orbit too heavy to land. The choir key put hands at the church door. The denim notch put hands at the coat rack. The pharmacy tear put hands on breathing. Everyone had hands in 1991. Only some carried maps. She bagged the lockbox and called for a clean chain. The lab would pull what it could from the paper edges, the bead holes, the key tag. Old oils still sing. Back at the precinct, the tape got another pass with a machine that could pull whispers out of humidifiers. At 19 seconds, the stagehand sound sharpened into a rhythm. Metal feet thudding wood. The sound a ladder makes when you plant it with a man who is practiced, not careful. At 42 seconds, a half phrase cut by static sounded like hold the light, not hold the door. Men who work in wings say that. Men with green caps live in sentences like that. The voice body on No Backstage still matched Delaney. The hold the light came from a throat the software said belonged to a different mapping of harmonics. Without a database to name it, it just held out its palm and waited for a name. Holt opened a fresh notebook and wrote Ray Dellin in a line that felt like chalk on brick. She sent pairs to the Union Hall where day labor turns into faces. An old steward flipped through a coffee-stained logbook from 1990-1992, pages dog-eared by memories he didn't like opening. Ray Dellin, maybe, he said, tapping a page where a Ray Dita started and slid into a blot because the pen died. Green hat, the steward added. We called him Kermit once and he didn't laugh. Addresses came with those names for a while and then didn't. A P.O. box on Archer, a boarding house on Washtenaw crossed out with a tidy X after the fire, a note in the margin, ladder his own. They pulled the P.O. box history and found nothing but expired rental and the absence that follows men who aren't sure the city wants to remember them. They walked the pawn shop under the tracks again and got the clerk to climb a crooked ladder to a shelf where junk lives between lives. Tapes people didn't want back, he said, and came down with a plastic tub that smelled like basements do when radios nap. A cassette labeled Aud Church, Jan 91 in a cramped hand. Holt's breath found its own rhythm. The pawn ticket at the bottom of the tub had a date. March 1992, the signature line read Ardell, with the tail pulled into a scratch like the writer changed his mind about his own name. They played the tape on a dusty boombox right there, fluorescent humming, clerk watching like it was a game show. Room tone first, then carts, metal on stone. Not the auditorium this time, a basement with concrete reverb, the sound of water and pipes like someone clearing their throat. A man said, "Move left, I got it," and the second man answered with a cough that had dust in it. Boots scuffed, boxes scraped, a key thudded against a wall. A door closed with the padded clunk of a basement fire door that never fully latches. Then the click, then hiss. No names, no clean confession, just place speaking in its accent. Holt bagged the tape and the pawn ticket, and in that same hour sent officers to 3 last known addresses from fragments nobody swears by. Dead ends that still put boots on porches the city forgot. At one, a kid's bike leaned against a railing and a woman from a window called down, "If you're looking for Ray, he fixed my stair in 91 and then disappeared." Green cap, quiet, ladder. "You people come every few years like the ghost is due rent," she said. Holt thanked her anyway because people keep talking when thanked. Delaney sat in interview too like he'd grown from the chair. He watched the blinds slice the room into shades of gray. Holt set the lockbox on the table and opened it an inch, enough for him to see denim and beads and a key-tagged choir in the hand he recognized. He closed his eyes for the length of a radiator tick. "So he kept a shrine," he said, voice flat. "You'll make that word for the camera." "I'll make the word evidence for a judge," Holt said. "You want me loyal to a man with a ladder," he said. And the sentence had the shape of a thing he wasn't going to say until he said it. "We worked the same rooms." He said we both kept the show going. He built the panel. I stored Lost and Found in it because it was space and I thought the school didn't need more trash in the hallways. You can make me a villain out of that, or you can make me poor. You recorded the room, Holt said. I recorded the room because the room tells the truth when people rehearse lies, he said. You hear the cough, that wasn't mine. You hear the ladder? I never planned it like that. You can tell the way a man sets a ladder if he's been doing stages or roofs. Roof guys thump different. She let that sit. Not because it absolved him, because detail sometimes opens doors you thought were glued shut. Roof and stage have dialects even in metal. She slid the photo of the VHS frame across. He looked down, then away, then down again like the paper burned. That's him, he said, too fast to be clever, too slow to be untrue. That's his ear. His ear had a nick. Name, she said, softer than a demand, harder than a plea. He shrugged like a man with too many boxes in his head and no labels left. He called himself Ray. Ray D, if you pushed. If I wrote it on a sheet, I wrote D-E-L because that's what it sounded like when he said it with drywall in his mouth. He talked like it cost something to finish a word. Holt stood. We'll finish it for him. Be careful, he said without looking up. People love an arrest more than a truth. He looked at the lockbox then, just once, and a muscle in his cheek flickered like a small power line in wind. If you arrest me, it will print neat, he said. If you find Ray, it will print messy. Cameras don't like messy. Cameras were already waiting outside the school when Holt went back because cold cases and ghost lights make good pictures. Reporters angled their bodies for the lens like the night had a best side. Detective, is this solved? Someone shouted, and the word slid across the sidewalk with the slipperiness of soap. Holt didn't look at them. She looked at the chalk X on stage left and the coring rig and the square of concrete like a healed wound. Not yet, she said to no one and everyone. The lab called as she stood under the fly lines. The bead string from the lockbox carried traces of talc and a microscopically thin film of hand lotion common in the early 90s, brand identified by a perfume chemical whose shape had gone out of fashion by the time flip phones arrived. On one bead's interior, a minute skin cell cluster not consistent with Delaney's DNA, not enough for a profile that could stand alone, enough to exclude the man in interview 2 from touching the bead when it was worn. If we find Ray, the tech said, we'll know if his hands were there. If he's alive, Holt said. If he's not, the tech answered, the hat in the ER might be as close as we get. Science is a cold friend. It holds your hand anyway. She sent Ruiz to the Archdiocese archive because bureaucracies keep ledgers as religion. In a book bound like a promise, he found a list of volunteer contractors who'd done work for 2 parishes in winter 1990-1991. A Ray D linked by an arrow to Delano, then crossed out and replaced with C. St. Bridget. Someone's hand changed its mind in ink. A penciled phone number sat beside it with a tiny note. Brother works at city facilities. They called the number. Disconnected. They called the brother's last known employer from a 1992 city directory that smelled like lost streets. A clerk who liked helping more than rules said, we had a Delaney, we had a Delano, we had a Deland. Men changed names to fit forms. Try the Old Parks payroll. Old Parks Payroll coughed up a seasonal hire in summer 1990. Raymond Deland, address Archer P.O. Box. Contact employer, self, contractor. No SSN on the sheet. A field blank that in 1990 meant someone forgot and nobody minded enough to fix. Next to equipment issued, a neat one for ladder. They issued ladders back then? Ruiz asked. They issued everything back then, the clerk said. The city thought it was Santa. Holt pinned the name variants to the corkboard, knowing a computer could hold them cleaner, but her eyes wanted the mess. Dellin, Deland, Delano, Del. She drew a line through all and wrote the constant above. Ray, green cap, ladder, choir key, panel maker. She stared until the lines blurred into a man who walked rooms and made himself vanish by moving sideways when people looked straight. The kind of man cities invent because cities need shows to go on and monsters to carry ladders. She went home and didn't go home. She sat in her car 2 blocks from the school and watched her breath opal the windshield. In the rear view, the ghost light burned like a star someone accidentally hung indoors. Her phone vibrated. The facial recognition team had chewed the rehearsal photo until it coughed. 2 possibles. One dead in 2001 with a different face when younger. One alive on paper, maybe. A man in Northwest Indiana with a minor contractor license under R. Delano renewed in 2010 and then let lapse. The license photo showed a man older, heavier, hair thin under a cap not green in grayscale. The ear had a nick. The world held still without getting quiet. She didn't say solved. She said a name into a phone and the name sounded like a door. Then she told the team to drive. The night inhaled. The city flexed its old bones. Under the stage, dust settled back into patterns it had practiced for 34 years, and the ghost light kept time for a story that was starting to play without an intermission. They rolled east before dawn, 2 cars, low beams, coffee gone cold in hands that still shook. Northwest Indiana woke up flat and gray, warehouses like sleeping ships, a billboard preaching a number to call. The address on the expired contractor license sat behind a chain-link fence with a gate that had learned to sag. One-story house, aluminum siding, satellite dish turned toward yesterday, a van in the drive, old Econoline, the paint tired to a matte. The ladder on top wore dust like a coat. The cap on the dashboard looked black in the dim. When the sun lifted a finger, it showed its true color, green. Holt stood across the street and let the morning decide if it wanted to help. County Sheriff's Office cruisers idled a polite distance away. A detective named Peltz from Hammond had the look of a man who did favors if you asked like a human. He took one glance at the photo from the rehearsal VHS and the license headshot from 2010 and nodded like he'd seen the shape of this man a dozen times and never learned the last name either. "You want uniform knock or quiet cup?" he asked. "Quiet cup," Holt said. Ray came out at 6:40 with a coat zipped to his throat and a stiffness in the shoulders that belongs to men who go up and down ladders for 30 years. He wore a cap, not green today. He carried a thermos and a plastic diner mug that had been used too long. He glanced left, right, not like a man checking for tails, but like a man checking weather. He slid into the van. The engine coughed, then settled. He drove 2 blocks to a place that served eggs and cast iron and coffee that scoured the inside of a day. Holt took the booth behind him. Ruiz took the counter. Peltz waited by the register, pretending to read a flyer about a parish fish fry. Ray drank and left. He left the mug half full. He left a napkin with a ring. He left a bus tub carrying 3 kinds of evidence if you knew how to ask the world for favors. Ruiz took the mug with a towel like a magician who believes in chain of custody. Holt took the napkin. Peltz paid for the eggs and carried the trash bag like it was his daughter's birthday cake. Back at the mobile setup, a tech who missed her kid's recital by living in this job swabbed the mug. She did it with a precision that had grown in her hands like muscle memory. "If he's our hat," she said, "I'll know before your coffee gets warm." Holt's coffee was already cold. She didn't drink it. She watched the van pull back into the driveway, and the man get out and walk like the ground knew him. He looked older than the license photo, a heaviness around the neck, a line at the mouth that didn't used to be there in 1991 when a camera caught his profile from the wing. He carried a bag of something that clanked. Keys. Keys have a sound. The call came at 8:17. "Partial from ER Cap," the lab said. "Partial from Bede, partial from Mugg, same contributor, not your Delaney, your Ray." The voice didn't congratulate. It annotated, "Science keeps its head while your heart starts to run." Warrant, county judge. Probable cause lined up neat. Volunteer log, VHS still, pawn ticket, church tape, auditorium tape, ER hat, green yarn match, Mugg DNA. It read like a list the city had kept under its tongue for 3 decades. The judge signed with a pen that ran a little because he kept forgetting to cap it. The paper didn't care. Paper wanted doors to open. They went to the house quiet. 3 knocks. "Sheriff's office." The door opened 2 inches and then 3. Ray looked through the gap like a man who lives with drafts. He didn't ask for a warrant. Holt showed him anyway. His eyes didn't widen. They narrowed, the way pupils do when light arrives too quick. He stepped back and let the room receive them like a reluctant host. The living room was small and stubbornly tidy, a recliner shaped by one body, a TV that tried to pretend it wasn't watching him back. On the shelf, a row of labeled coffee cans, screws, hooks, caps, nails. One said keys. Inside, nothing but cold brass that didn't open anything anymore. On the wall, a calendar from 2011 stuck on April like the house had decided that was the last good month. No photos, no kids, no wedding, not a soul he wanted to be reminded of. "Mr. Delano," Holt said. His gaze flicked. Something tight moved in his jaw. "License expired," he said, as if that answered a different question. "We need to look under your house," Holt said, "and in your garage." "You got the paper," he said. He sounded tired, not theatrical. Men who lie for sport warm up first. He didn't. The garage smelled like oil and failed plans, ladder racks, sawhorses, a workbench disciplined into grids, a pegboard whose outlines traced the ghosts of missing tools. He kept the place like a shrine to usefulness. On the bench sat a brass tag stamped choir in a hand that matched the St. Bridget tag. Not on a key, just the tag, as if language had fallen off a meaning. Holt bagged it. She kept her face the same shape. The house crawl space was tall enough to sit and low enough to be a punishment. Plank walk, insulation that had given up on staying inside its paper jackets. Holt sent Ruiz. He found boxes labeled with months and years, neat, dull, winter after winter. He found nothing that glowed. Sometimes the absence is news. Sometimes it just wastes your knees. They searched the van. The ladder had new rubber feet, Werner brand. Same Ski-U they'd chased in Chicago. The ladder rungs had a polish from boots that no amount of cleaner fakes. Behind the driver's seat sat a small lockbox. Cheap, keyed, empty. It smelled like coins and fear of theft more than fear of police. When you haul your life in a van, you keep your life inside metal. Holt went back inside and sat on the arm of a chair because chairs take sides in rooms like this. She put the rehearsal photo on the coffee table. She put the VHS still beside it. She put the mug beside that. Ray looked at the photos for a long time. Then he looked at the mug like a man realizing his mouth isn't private. "You took my cup," he said, not angry, just surprised that the world can reach into a man's breakfast and pull out his secrets. "You worked the St. Bridget pageant," Holt said. "You built a panel under an auditorium stage 3 blocks away. You had the choir key. You walked rooms with ladders and people thanked you for making their shows go smooth." She slid the inhaler photo across, the pharmacy label ghosted by age. "A child vanished. You were there." He stared at the inhaler like it was a relic that could damn or save. "I fix what breaks," he said. "I fix doors that swell in winter. I fix rails for old ladies who don't want to fall. I fix stages so kids can pretend to be snowflakes without falling through." He looked at the TV. He looked at the ceiling. "You want villain," he said softly. "You always want villain." "I want a map that goes all the way to the end," Holt said. He pressed a fist into his leg until the knuckles blanched. "That school," he said, and stopped and started again. "That school didn't throw anything out because the budget couldn't stretch for new. The church didn't throw anything out because throwing out reminds you you're poor, so everything stayed. Lost and found became a hell." He gestured toward a coffee can that said caps. "You start keeping things because nobody else will, and then people like you call them trophies." "Emily Watson," Holt said, "because names are anchors when men try to drift." He closed his eyes for one heartbeat longer than a blink. "I didn't touch that girl," he said. "I carried a ladder, I carried boxes, I carried guilt because the city likes to hand it to the man with tools." He opened his eyes. They were bloodshot in the stale light. "If you got my voice on a tape, it's because I read a sign out loud like a joke to myself. If you got my hat in a hospital, it's because I sat with a burn on my hand and left the thing there because hats aren't worth remembering. If you got my cap thread under a stage, it's because my coat caught on something when we built your trap." He said your, and the pronoun hung like a charge. "Who is we?" Holt asked. He swallowed. He didn't look at the photos. He looked at his hands like a man choosing which one to lose. "You have him," he said. "You had him before you had me. You have him in a room with blinds and a chair that squeaks." He didn't say Frank's name. He didn't have to. The room said it for him. "You and Frank are brothers," Holt said, measuring each word like evidence. He blinked again, slower, as if considering whether to correct her or let the city write the line. "We worked the same schools," he said. "We did the same jobs for people who don't know your last name and don't need to. We watched the same doors. In a city like that, what's the difference between a brother and a man who hands you a wrench?" The tech from Chicago called. The number on Holt's phone looked like relief and felt like a machine. "We ran an old municipal employment card from Parks. Raymond Delland was printed over an impression that says Raymond Delaney if you powder the paper right. It's the same SSN as a fragment we pulled from a union card that burned at Washtenaw. He used variants and..." The tech hesitated. "The Archdiocese ledger note about a brother at city facilities? That brother could be Frank. It's messy on purpose. Names mutate when paperwork gets tired." Holt watched Ray while the city's filing cabinets reshaped his outline. Ear nick, ladder stance, the quiet that isn't emptiness, it's inventory. "He's not my blood," Ray said at last, as if the phone call had been on speaker inside his head. "But we shared keys. Sometimes that's thicker." He leaned forward. His cap shadowed his eyes. "I didn't take that girl." "Who did?" Holt said, because everything else in the room was a hallway to that door. He looked at the rehearsal photo. He put one dry finger on the frame where a shadow crossed the wing. "You ever see a pageant from backstage?" he asked. He didn't wait for the answer. "Nobody looks at the men. The men hold ladders. The men fix lights. The men say, 'Hold the light.' And a child holds a flashlight like a commandment. The men prop the door for the smell of snow. People don't see hands when there's confetti in the air." He tapped the photo again, his nail a tiny metronome. "You want to believe the man with a ladder is a monster, because then you can put him in a box. I am not your box." Peltz cleared his throat by the door, not a warning, just a clock. "He's lawyered?" he murmured. "No," Holt said. "He's tired." She stood. She nodded to the garage again. They took the workbench apart by respect. Under the top, taped to the underside like a cautious secret, lay a small bundle in a plastic bag, sealed, labeled in the same neat block script. "School Lost and Found, 1991. Inside, a ribbon frayed to blue threads, not the barrette. A ribbon like the one that had held a ponytail in a photo on the original flyer, or like 1,000 ribbons 1,000 girls wore. The world can be cruel like that. Holt didn't perform the find. She bagged it and wrote the time and wrote the room and wrote her name like she'd been doing for half her life. She looked at Ray and waited for the twitch, the flinch, the gaze that grabs a door, a window, a lie. He sat like a chair that learned to be a rock. You keep trash, she said. I keep what other people lose, he said, because it all ends up mine anyway. He looked past her to the fence. I told a kid once to go back because backstage isn't for everyone. He laughed and went anyway. It wasn't Emily. It was a boy with a red shirt. He didn't get taken. He got bored. He went home. Some stories end like that. You never hear those on the news. The ASA in Chicago wanted him in their room before any confession decided to exist. Extradition, coordination, signatures, a caravan. Peltz made calls that made other calls. The world moves faster when a city's ghosts start showing up in daylight. Ray didn't run. He didn't ask to change his shirt. He asked to lock his garage. Holt watched him do it. She watched his hands on the padlock he probably bought in 1993. She watched the way he checked the gate, the way he tapped the ladder foot with a toe out of habit to feel if rubber still held. Back across the state line, reporters lined the church steps like pilgrims with microphones. Someone had already typed, "Arrest made in a newsroom," that likes its verbs early. Holt ignored the camera eyes and went to interview 2. Frank looked like he'd been awake since 1991. She put the choir tag from Ray's bench on the table. She put the ER hat photo next to it. She put the DNA sheet on top with the blanks filled the way science fills blanks. His lips thinned. His gaze flicked from tag to paper to her. You found him, he said. Not a question. I found a man with your shadow and his own, Holt said. Frank's laugh sounded like a street after snowplows. Rough, ugly, too loud for the room. Headlines hate that, he said. 2 shadows. Who gets the boldface? Tell me the thing you never wrote down, Holt said. He stared at the blinds and the light they broke up. I let him build the panel, he said, because he said the school needed a place to keep cables where kids couldn't trip. Because he said the world runs on pockets. Because he said we don't get paid to argue. He rubbed his wrist like a man trying to erase a stamp. If he took her, I should have seen it, but I didn't see anything except the job. He closed his eyes. I touched the toy because it was in the snow and nobody was around, and I wanted to put it on the stoop so her mother would see it when she came home. That's what I did. That's how my finger got there. You believe it or you don't. Holt thought about the inhaler click on the tape. She thought about the map with red ink. She thought about the panel that didn't belong to either of them fully, but belonged to a city that let men like them make spaces for secrets. Where is she? She asked, not because she thought this time he'd answer, but because the question keeps the room from becoming only a room. His eyes dampened in the stubborn white light. Rooms move, he said. Walls shift. Basements flood. Stages get rebuilt. If you want a place, dig where nobody clapped. He opened his eyes and looked at her like a man offering what he had left. Go under the choir loft, not the basement you opened. The crawl under the raised pews. He liked steps. Steps hide sound. She didn't wait. She didn't call a press conference. She called Ruiz and the priest and the ASA and a crew that could move like thieves with permission. They took the church by the side door because grief prefers the side aisle. The choir loft smelled like hymnals and old polish and the dust that falls from songs. Under the pews, a narrow crawl ran like a throat, boards, cross-bracing, a century of nails holding up hallelujahs. They sent the borescope in again. The screen showed the dark and black and white, wood grain like fingerprints, shadow like confession. Then a line that wasn't wood. A seam where wood met something laid against it long ago. Tape glue, plastic, a space just wide enough for a shoebox. Not a body, never a body. A shrine to a moment someone made permanent because that's what power looks like when it's small and mean. Ruiz eased a panel. He reached into the throat of the church and pulled out a bag so brittle the tape threatened to turn to powder. Inside, a child's mitten with a knit snowflake pattern, ivory turned tea. A small folded paper heart cut from a library handout with penciled letters. E.M. The same adolescent block, the same half name, a brass key, not choir, storage, and a Polaroid of stairs, steep, ascending, taken from below. On the back, the cramped note, hold the light. Holt held the mitten like something hot, not solved, not yet, but the map began to draw itself with a stubborn pen, a line from stage to basement to loft, from men with keys to rooms that don't exist on blueprints, from a winter no one forgave to a morning where the air finally admitted what it had been holding. She looked at the stairs in the Polaroid and then at the real stairs that rose to the loft. He keeps telling us where he went, Ruiz said, voice low, reverent. He kept everything because he doesn't trust memory, or he wanted someone to find it if he disappeared. Holt nodded once. He wanted a story, she said. We'll give him a sentence. Outside, the city breathed in. The headline was already writing itself shamefully neat across a banner on a truck. Cold case. Solved. Arrest. Inside, the church held its light like a secret it was finally ready to share in pieces. Holt slid the mitten into a bag and closed it with hands that refused to shake. "Bring him," she said, and the hallway echoed as if the word solved had just learned that it would have to work for a living.